Hi everyone, hello and welcome to Are You Ready for Enterprise Plus? My name is Shimi Bandiel and I'm a DevOps consultant at JFrog. And before we go into the agenda for the day, just a bit of housekeeping, okay? So everything will be recorded and be made available after the session is ended. If you have a question, you can submit your questions at the Q&A panel and I will answer them at the end. Okay, and resources, and you can, of course, try the Enterprise Plus yourself and, download the trial. And I'll talk a bit more about that near the end. So a bit about myself. As I've mentioned, I'm a DevOps consultant at JFrog. Before JFrog, I was one of those of Trainologic, a training and consulting company that was acquired by JFrog a bit over a year ago. So actually, I was debating whether to name this webinar as, are you ready for Enterprise Plus? Or, another name could be, why didn't we name the company Artifactory? Because every now and then, people are asking me, where do you work? And I'm saying, like, I work at JFrog, and they're like, well, okay, so what do you do? We're not familiar with this company. And I'm like, dude, are you familiar with Artifactory? And they're like, sure, of course, everyone knows Artifactory. The de facto, binary repository manager. And then they ask me, why didn't you name the company Artifactory? It should have been, a better branding, for the company. And I'm like, okay, it's not only about Artifactory. And this is also, the purpose of this webinar, to talk about the broader scope, what we call the Enterprise Plus platform. And actually, it all starts with the vision of the company. So if you're not familiar with JFrog's vision, the vision of JFrog is liquid software. We envision a world where, software updates are continuously flowing like water. So you always push your code into your Git repositories, and then it ends up at your runtimes, continuously flowing updates. But in order to have that, in order to reach this goal, to make this vision come true, we need very good pipelines. We need a very good infrastructure and culture and everything that's related to that. And we try to provide, that and have that goal in mind when we add more services and more products to the Enterprise Plus platform. And this is what I'm going to talk about. So let's start. So the first thing is, when we released the Enterprise Plus over a year ago, we went to a lot of our customers, a lot of our, beta customers that tested this platform and tried to gather information about the needs, what else in addition to Artifactory is needed to reach the goals of liquid software, of providing, seamless and continuous updates to the software updates to the runtimes. And we found out that the use cases where everything, all the services were needed can be divided into mainly three groups of typical users. First is, what we call a super DevOps teams. We saw customers and companies where we have a very small DevOps group that serves a huge amount of developers. The ratio between DevOps and developers is very high, and they struggle. They struggle a lot, and if you are also in this situation, how much effort is put into serving everything and making sure that the pipelines are working and nothing is stuck. And as we all know, in the current ecosystem of DevOps, we have so many tools and so many features that it's very hard to combine everything to make, a very good and robust pipeline. Second group we have encountered what we call cloud migration. People working in and customers working in very complex environments where they need to publish into multiple cloud vendors. We have multiple targets for distributing the software. And it looks like it's very hard to manage all of this. And the third group is actually relates to the previous one, but from a different angle, is distributors. We have a very complex distribution scenarios. For example, retail customers, from the retail industry want to distribute software updates to their branches, or financial companies want to distribute software updates to branches. And we see that in IoT and many other sectors. And so we gather a lot of information from that. And we saw that there are 4 key problems in order to have a maintainable and robust system for the DevOps. And those problems are visibility and intelligence, having some dashboard or a central place where you can get metrics and insights into what's happening in my pipelines, in my DevOps environment. How everything is working, how everything is flowing and being distributed. The problem here is that with so many tools, from the source control, through the CI, through the binary repository, scanning and quality gates, and then distribution, and then runtime environments. It's very hard to gather all this information and make, decisions, good decisions based on that. Second problem is the scaling complexity. And going back to where, we started with Artifactory, essentially, monolith applications, very few runtime environments. And these days, everything is based on, or not everything, but, in many cases, it's based on containers, microservices, different languages, different build tools, different environments and clouds that you distribute to. And how do you map all this complexity? How do you see, which versions were distributed where, whether we have security vulnerabilities in versions that we distributed? How are we going to distribute? And also that brings me to the third problem about gaining trust. How am I trusting my binaries? How do I know that someone hasn't changed something in the binaries, at the target sites, at the runtimes? Or how do I know that I don't have security vulnerabilities? And we'll get to that later on. And then the physics, you want to distribute. For example, imagine a cruise company, you want to distribute software updates to ships. You have very unreliable networks, and it's very hard to manage distribution in these scenarios. You want to distribute to service centers. If we're talking about, software for cars, you want to distribute in retail companies to 3,000 branches. So it's not a simple problem. So let's have a very high level overview about the components of the Enterprise Plus and what we are offering. So the main differentiator between Enterprise Plus and the other tiers that we offer is the other tiers, like JFrog, Pro and Pro X and Enterprise. The main focus is Artifactory. The main focus is we have a very good binary repository manager, universal repository manager, and you can store your binaries there. You can, of course, assign metadata and all of that. And there are a lot of features there that make it AJ and Enterprise ready. But Enterprise Plus brings the entire portfolio of additional products on which I'm going to focus that will enable you a broader view, management, and capabilities to your entire pipeline. So what do we have here? So what we have here is, of course, the bread and butter Artifactory, the binary repository manager. You can see we have Xray, the tool for scanning for security vulnerabilities, as well as performing third-party license compliance checks. We have distribution, which allows you to distribute to production environments or runtime environments. And we'll talk a lot about distribution in this webinar and features it brings you, like edge nodes, read-only artifactories, and we'll cover that. There's also access for managing the security entities across all the products. It's actually a part of Artifactory. I'll go more into access when I talk about access federation. Then there's mission control, the single pane of glass to manage all the services, manage security replication, manage the topology itself, and also a component there called Insight, which can bring you some insight into your pipelines and build metrics, etc. And then there's the new addition, which I'm going to touch near the end, which is JFrog Pipelines, our new CI tool that we acquired. And I'll touch upon that, at what it brings to the portfolio. Okay, so the first problem that we've talked about is the visibility and intelligence. Okay, so again, the problem is we have a huge set of tools that we are using in the DevOps ecosystem, and we need to get some insights, some metrics, and in order to be able to identify and quickly solve some problems. So why is JFrog the right tool, or provides the right tool for handling this kind of problem? Well, we found out that Artifactory, where it sits in the entire DevOps pipelines, is actually sitting at a crucial spot in the DevOps pipeline, because this is where you store your binaries. So all the components usually communicate with Artifactory one way or another. The CI server, whether you use like Jenkins, TeamCity, GitLab, or our own JFrog pipelines, needs to put the binaries there. If you use your, let's say you have static code analysis tools and you scan your source code, the results could be put into Artifactory. So we have designed Artifactory actually since the beginning to have a very rich metadata capabilities. And we highly recommend, and we consider it a best practice, to add everything you know about your binaries and your builds into Artifactory. Okay, so for example, whenever I'm like integrating a static code analysis tool, like I don't know, like SonarQube, so there's a lot of information there, and I usually add the important pieces into Artifactory as metadata, like the total quality score and dashboard links as metadata into Artifactory. And if you're not aware, so let me share my screen for a quick second. So if I go here to mission control, I just want to show you something. If you're not aware, Artifactory understands not only repositories and artifacts, but also builds. Okay, there's the build browser here. So usually we are encouraged to publish build information and whatever you know about the build that was done, environment variables, dependencies, the transitive dependencies, everything, publish that to Artifactory. Artifactory will be aware of that. And then what you can have is more capabilities regarding monitoring and gaining some more insight about the actual builds. So as a part of Enterprise Plus, you have a tool called Insight. It's part of Mission Control, and it gives you some metrics about what's happening in your builds and components involving that. So some metrics that were taken from, the Git repository, from your CI server, in this example, like Jenkins, I'm using in the demo environment because JFrog Pipelines is not GA yet, so I'm talking about just at the end. And so getting some metrics out of that will help you hopefully solve problems if you encounter them, okay? And of course, the goals in Insight is to make it more rich or richer in the upcoming releases. So you will get at the end, not only just metrics, but also analysis, trends, and at the end, even decision-making suggestions that you can have in one place. So, use cases. Let's see, show my screen again, and let's see what do we have there. So when I go into mission control, okay, I'll talk about the topology later when we'll talk about complexity of the environment. And I'm going to the projects tab, and we can define a project. So I've defined the project here, like demo application. It includes several builds that you can select, okay? The way it works, mission control communicates. So I'll just go back one step. Communicates to Jenkins. You add your CI servers to the as services to mission control, and then mission control, we gather information from these servers, in this case Jenkins, and then show you some metrics regarding your builds. So what you can see here is that you have number of commits and average build duration, average build promotions. So if you're not familiar with build promotions and what that means, so just a quick note about that. So when you create a build in Artifactory, you have a job, you publish some build. We recommend publishing that to a development level repository. And then as you go through your QA and tests, you promote the build. You don't want to ever build or rebuild your binaries again. There's a notion of, you know, if my source code didn't change and my list of dependencies didn't change, so if I rebuild my code, if I recompile it, then I get the same binary. And that's not always correct. It's mostly correct. This is, by the way, from all of the scenarios, mostly correct or mostly right is the most problematic state to be, because it's very hard to catch problems when testing. So if you rebuild your code, then maybe there's a transitive dependency depending on latest version that gets changed when you want to rebuild it for production. Maybe there's an environment variable, like, I don't know, Java class pass on your build machine that can change the outcome of the binary, can change the result. So what we recommend is you build once and then you promote the build. You promote the build through the different repositories from, I don't know, Docker Dev local repository to Docker QA local repository, and then to Docker Prod local repository. So this is the build promotions. And you can see also number of dependencies, and if you have vulnerabilities, also the vulnerabilities count that you have. And then, you know, you can have some insights about it. You know, if you see like average build promotion is going down sometimes, then what's happening? You know, less build promotions means that builds are getting into the development stage, but they are less likely going into the later stages like pre-prod and prod. And then you can see, okay, so what about maybe there were additional dependencies that were added that affected that? Maybe we had a vulnerabilities count that affected that. And if I see that nothing, for example, I'm just seeing that average build promotions is going a bit low, but I don't see anything else happening. So probably tests are failing. And after that period of time, the tests were fixed. So you can gain some insight from this tool, get some metrics, get some insight about your builds. And this will become much more rich when JFrog Pipelines is going to be a part of the insight, because then, you know, we'll have the CI tool that also integrates seamlessly with all the other components. And that's one part of Enterprise Plus, what it brings, you know, some metrics, some insight into the entire DevOps pipeline. So next problem is the complexity. So we have a lot of customers, and we see that, you know, where the developers are not only, you know, on a single site. You have multiple geographical locations for development. You have multiple locations for runtime environments. But for now, I mostly want to focus on multiple geographical locations for development. Okay, and the tool that can help you manage this complexity is mission control. So mission control is actually part of, if you're familiar, if you're not, enterprise class customer yet. So you have, let's say, JFrog Enterprise. Mission control is part of JFrog Enterprise. So you probably have it if you have the enterprise license. However, some of the features there are specific to Enterprise Plus, and I will focus on these. So in general, we consider two types of topologies when we're talking about multiple sites. First one is a star topology, when there's a centralized location where you manage either your repositories or your security entities, and then you want to distribute or to replicate, probably a better word, you want to replicate both your binaries and then also your security entities into additional locations. So for example, let's say that, you have in this small image, and I will show you it live in a couple of minutes, you have a site here at Amsterdam, and you want to manage there everything, the users, the groups, the permissions, and you want to replicate the security entities as well as the repositories, some of them or all of them, to other sites like, I don't know, Denver and Cape Town and Bangkok. So this is one type of topology. Second type of topology is a mesh topology. With a mesh topology, you want to essentially integrate everything that's happening in multiple sites across these multiple geographical locations, and have everything that's being, updated or changed or added in one site to all the other sites. And I mean binaries, in your repositories, and I mean security entities, users, groups, and permissions. And so the feature that was added to mission control, the feature that was added to Enterprise Plus platform is called Access Federation. So regarding the binaries, the repositories, so this is actually a feature of Artifactory. So in Artifactory, before E+, what you could do is you could have replication. You have a repository, let's say Docker prod level repository or development level repository in the US, and you have a team in India, and you want everything that was developed at the US site to be replicated to the development team in India for consumption one way, or you want to have it as a mesh topology. Everything that was developed on either site will be replicated to the other site. So replication of repositories is a core feature of Artifactory. It is already there. It's not it's not a unique part or an addition to Enterprise Plus. What was added to Enterprise Plus is the same idea, you can say, of replication, but now for security entities. Okay? Access Federation allows you to replicate permission targets, access control lists, share the user profile if it was changed or added in one site to all the other sites, and have a single secret used globally with all the servers, access tokens, and SSO, same SSO across all sites. So let's have a look at that in mission control. So I'm going to share my screen, going back to mission control. So in the demo environment, and this is actually what you will see when you download the trial for Enterprise Plus. You can see we have 4 locations. We have a location in the US, one in Europe, one in India, and one in China. And you can see that there's a mesh replication or mesh federation between India and the US. So you manage Access Federation in the admin section in Mission Control. And I go to Access Federation, I go to Configuration. And here I can see what's already defined. And we can, of course, apply new topologies. So whenever you want to apply Access Federation, you need to decide which type of topology you want to apply, either a star or a mesh. And as you can see in the list here, you can apply multiple topologies. So that means that, we are not looking only for some simple use cases, although they are the majority. We're also looking at much more complex environments where you have multiple federations that can be, some of them disjoint, some of them unions between the several locations. So when you want to apply topology, you decide whether you want to star. So a star, again, is you manage security in a central location, and you want to propagate that to all the other locations. So if I click star, I will need to select my source access site. So a couple of notes about access. Access is the internal service in Artifactory that manages the security entities. So every time you do an authentication in one of our products, it eventually goes to an access service in an Artifactory. That's why when you, for example, install Mission Control, you need to select the authentication provider. What's the authentication provider? An Artifactory instance. Inside that Artifactory instance, there's an access service that will manage the security. So when you have multiple sites, you have multiple Artifactory clusters or standalones, and you have access servers inside of them. So when you want to set access federation, you need to select in a star topology the source access service. So I can select like one of these. Let's say the Artifactory US will be the source. And then I can select the targets for this star replication. By default, as you can see, everything will be the target. So I can say, no, I want just these two Artifactories. They are edge nodes, but I'll, cover edge nodes later on. For now, let's consider those as regular Artifactories. And I want also the one in India. So doing that, doing next. And then I can select, what do I want to federate? What do I want to replicate? And I can choose from all the types of security entities that Access manages. It will be users and or groups and or permissions. And I can also define, include and exclude patterns for permissions, and also access tokens. And when I define that, then everything that is being changed on the source side will be federated and replicated to the other sites. So that is a star topology. And then when I want to do a mesh topology, there is no like source now because everything is bidirectional. So I choose the participating Artifactory services, and then I choose everyone. And then if I choose everyone, then whatever happens on location will be replicated and federated to the other locations. And again, I can select the entity types here as well and control exactly what I want to federate and replicate. And in some use cases or topologies which are a bit more simple, it's like, yeah, let's, federate everything like in a star topology or a mesh topology. And in other more complex scenarios or topologies where we have like, multiple sites which the users already defined there, and we want to add the Enterprise Plus, the Access Federation, after the users are already defined, maybe also the groups, so we can do only like permissions and maybe just a subset of the permissions for specific like repositories. We can do only groups if we want to, and level and manage the permissions different on each site. We have seen, after more than a year that this feature is being in production, that the Access Federation is being used in many different use cases and many different topologies and configurations. So that's about Access Federation. And then the third problem, gaining trust. So, being in the DevOps teams, I want to, bust a myth about DevOps not equal to DevSecOps. That I'm dealing with DevOps. I'm managing the builds. I'm managing, the Artifactory and the distribution and the Jenkins, but I don't deal with security vulnerabilities. We found that, and we believe that this is not true. That we also need to manage security as part of the DevOps lifecycle, because we believe that security scanning and DevSecOps is an integral part of the DevOps cycle, and you will not reach the liquid software goal or vision without also managing that crucial piece, because it's very important that we will not distribute something that has known vulnerability. And Xray is a tool that we believe is the best suited for this task. So we all know that most of the code, or most of the lines of code that are being executed at our runtimes, the vast majority of them is not lines of code that we have written in our company. It's third parties, okay? And it could be like, you see here the pyramid. It could be like the direct third parties we are using. I don't know, you use like JavaScript libraries, Java libraries, PHP libraries, and then, there are vulnerabilities there, like divide concept in PHP, known vulnerability. But then it grows because, it could be like Heartbleed in your OpenSSL packages that you are using in one of the components in a lower tier. And it could be like a problem in the Kubernetes environment that you are running on. And even in the operation system, you could have maybe using something that is vulnerable to SPECTRE or MELTDOWN. So we have so many layers and components that we are using that may be vulnerable, and we want to know about it real time. We want to be able to take actions, and we want also to be able to understand when a new vulnerability is discovered, how are we being impacted by it? Do we have something in production that currently has vulnerability? So it's not only about the DevOps lifecycle. It's also about, applications running in productions that may already be vulnerable because new vulnerabilities being found. So introducing, if you're not familiar with JFrog Xray. So Xray is, of course, a part of Enterprise Plus. It is also something that you can use without Enterprise Plus. But for now, I'm going to talk about it as part of the platform. So the why of Xray is, of course, provide you with vulnerability scanning, and it also performs third-party license compliance checks. I will not focus on that. I will focus more on the vulnerabilities. And the way we present or Xray is that Xray is aimed at continuously scanning your jobs and your binaries. And as you keeps building and pushing as being an integral part of your CI/CD pipeline. Okay, so first, it's universal. It works on. So actually, I will just add share my screen for that and show you what do I mean by universal. So if I go to mission control and go into Xray, so here it is. You can see at the home page of Xray, here near the bottom, the supported package types that Xray knows how to scan, from JavaScript to Java, OS packages, Debian, .NET, Python, of course, Docker, which is very important, RPMs, and also PHP, and also Go. And we add more and more packages as we release more versions or newer updates for Xray. You keep in mind that, understanding the components of your binaries is something that we do very well, in Artifactory, and we have that in the build information. So Xray can leverage all of that. Xray performs a deep recursive scan, scanning your binaries for components, subcomponents, dependencies, and transitive dependencies. Creates a component graph out of that, and then matches this component graph with our vulnerability and license database, and then can take some automated actions according to that. And I will elaborate more, of course, in a couple of minutes. Just to show you an example about that, let's pick like one of the builds that I have. So here is a build that creates an Helm chart, and you can see a lot of high severity violations, security vulnerabilities and violations. Keep in mind, this is a demo environment. Everything is vulnerable here. Hopefully, in your systems, you will not see that much red, if at all. But let's pick a vulnerability, a security vulnerability here. Pick one of them. So here you can see the deep recursive scan. You can see that we found a high severity vulnerability. Here it is, severity high. We found that in our build, the build is named step 4 create Helm chart, version 2.3.4. And then there's a Docker image. In one of the layers, there's a WAR file. Inside that WAR file, there's a Maven dependency on Struts2 core library version 2.3.14. Okay? And then, of course, you get the information about the vulnerability. I will not do a full Xray demo here. It requires, a whole webinar by itself. But you get the information. If we know about a fixed version, like in this problem, you will be able to see that, fixed version. Let's see, here it is. Here we have a fixed version. So you will be able to see the fixed version, and you can take remediation actions accordingly. We also provide the IDE plugins, shifting left the discovery of the vulnerabilities to the developers that can, help reduce the load on the DevOps and DevSecOps teams. And the important part that Xray plays, because it is tightly integrated with Artifactory, is the automatic actions that we can take whenever, according to a policy, whenever we found a vulnerability. So again, taking a look at what can be done when we encounter, like, high severity vulnerability. So the important parts here, and again, I'm not covering everything, is that we can block downloads in Artifactory. So this will essentially instruct Xray that whenever this security rule is being triggered, to mark that specific vulnerable artifact as not being able to be downloaded from Artifactory. And that means that this artifact, like, that specific Struts2 component or specific Debian component, will no longer be able to be used as a dependency directly downloaded or promoted as part of a build or distributed as long as this is in place. And that's a very strong capability. And you can combine that in addition to failing builds. So failing builds essentially means that Xray will send a flag as part of its scanning result. So if in your build you are asking Xray to scan your build and you get that flag, you can then fail the build according to this flag. And that will allow you to create some policies where high severity vulnerabilities, for example, will always fail the builds, and you will get that immediately in your dashboard of the CI server. In addition to that, keep in mind that in Insight, in Mission Control, you can also see vulnerabilities counts for builds, so you get that metric as well. So going back to the presentation, you have a lot of metadata. It is universal, as I've shown you. Pipeline ready, integrates very well with the pipeline and can fail builds. And of course, because it's part of the same tool set, it has a very strong Artifactory integration and can fail builds and mark components as not being able to be downloaded. And of course, there are multiple other features there, triggering some webhooks. And I'll show you a bit about also the impact analysis in a second. But I want also to mention something about the Xray journey that we made. So we started adding, since the inception of Xray, added more and more features until at one point we realized that, the tool can be awesome. Features are great. Integration is awesome. Being able to focus on continuously scanning along, as the flows through the pipelines is awesome. But if you don't have a good, let me rephrase that. If you don't have an excellent security vulnerability database, it loses some of the attraction, because features are very important, but even more important is identifying actual vulnerabilities. And by that, I mean both reducing the number of false positives and also, having, true and timely vulnerabilities data, because we want to know about the vulnerabilities as soon as it is being discovered, hopefully before it is going public on the public vulnerability databases like NVD. We want to be able to identify that sooner than that. And we found that this is, very important. So, and reducing number of false positive, by the way, is also extremely important. So I know that many vendors, they pride themselves with the number of vulnerabilities they are able to discover, but keep in mind that false positives just introduce huge amounts of workloads on your teams. And at the end, you don't want to end with, drowning in a sea of vulnerabilities information that, just a portion of it are true vulnerabilities. So what we've done is several months ago, we've signed a partnership with risk-based security, integrating VulnDB, one of the leading, if not the leader, of private vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities databases in the market, and integrating this database into Xray. So essentially, when you now use Xray, you have access to the full vulnerabilities data of VulnDB, which has a very large count of unique vulnerabilities before they are being published to public resources like NVD. And our team of analysts keeps continuously adding and bringing those vulnerabilities from both, the public databases and also the private databases like VulnDB into Xray's database. And the work they do is that they try to eliminate the false positives and also pinpoint the exact sub-component and specific versions that are vulnerable. And again, going back to the Xray demo. So if I go to I want to show you also the impact analysis. So if I go again to the analysis section and I'm like identifying, as before, a component that has a vulnerability. Let's take this Ubuntu package that has high severity vulnerability. If I go into that, this is the specific subcomponent. So I can also get the impact analysis. How this specific subcomponent impacts my entire DevOps pipelines. So I can see the locations, the builds and repositories that are being affected by this specific vulnerability. And you can see that there's a staging repository, and also a production repository. So if I'm only taking into my production environments binaries from production level repositories in Artifactory, then I know that's something that is vulnerable on the production repository, most likely ended up in one of our runtimes. And I can also take a look in the ancestors tab at which components include this specific subcomponent. And I can see, there are 2 Docker layers that has this subcomponent. And then, perform my impact analysis that way. And one last thing I want to share about Xray is we have also developed an open source named Cube Xray, available on GitHub. It's a very nice add-on to a Kubernetes cluster. This is, of course, only for Kubernetes, bringing the capabilities of Xray to your runtimes. So what this will do, it's an add-on that you put inside your Kubernetes cluster, and then this add-on communicates with Xray, sharing the information about the pods that are deployed inside your Kubernetes cluster. And then Xray can inform this component when new vulnerabilities are found, and you can take actions like scale this replica set or deployment to 0, delete these pods, or take no actions, just send Slack messages, things like that. So yeah, this is bringing the capabilities of Xray to your runtime environment. Okay, so going now forward to the, to the fourth problem, the physics. So it's not about a single site anymore, or multiple just development sites. We are talking now about how do we distribute the software. So we've created our builds. We have pushed them through several quality gates like static code analysis, vulnerability scanning tools, and we've promoted these builds, from development to QA and pre-prod and prod repositories. But now we need to distribute our software into the runtime environments. And we see with many customers that they have some complex topologies or complex distribution scenarios. And for that, we have introduced JFrog Distribution, which is a part of Enterprise Plus. And the idea here is to introduce a new feature or component in our system called the release bundle. So what's a release bundle? So before that, let me talk about, moving binaries. So in Artifactory, we have a feature called replication. You can replicate a repository from one Artifactory in one site to another Artifactory on a different site. So you can say, yeah, I'll use that for distribution. I will have my runtime site with an Artifactory there, and I have my development site, and I will replicate the production level repository from the development site to the runtime site. The problem with that is that we don't have a concept of a software bundle here. We're replicating a repository, we're replicating, Docker images one after the other, or Java, jar binaries, or Python, or whatnot. But we don't have the concept of, a software release, like, 2 Docker images, 1 Helm chart, and 4 Java binaries as a single version that I want to distribute. So with distribution, we have a release bundle concept. A release bundle is a manifest of components that you want to bundle together and distribute transactionally to your production site, okay, to your runtime environments. And this concept, okay, so here we're talking about before that some use cases for distribution. You want to distribute your software to customers. okay? So they can consume that. Of course, outside of your organization network. You want to distribute to multiple locations. Use cases are, again, I've mentioned that at the beginning, you are a retail company or a financial company, or deal with IoT, or a cruise company, the software updates to ships. There are multiple use cases for software distribution in complex environments. So we create these release bundles, and I'll show you how it is done in a couple of minutes. And then we distribute these release bundles to either regular Artifactories, but better even, to something new that we have is that an Artifactory edge node. So what is an edge node? An edge node, you can consider that as a slim or thin read-only Artifactory. Okay? So what do we mean by a read-only Artifactory? So an edge node is an Artifactory with an edge node license, which is part of Enterprise Plus. And in an edge node, you cannot upload binaries, you cannot delete binaries, and you cannot update binaries. Okay? Read-only Artifactory. So how do we get some stuff inside that into that edge node? So the only way to push or publish binaries into an edge node is by distributing a release bundle. Okay? So you create a release bundle and you distribute that to one or more edge nodes, and that's the almost only way of getting something into an edge node. So in addition to that, what you can also have in an edge node is a remote repository, what people sometimes call a proxy, and not a regular remote repository. So for example, on an edge node, you cannot have a remote repository to Docker Hub or JCenter. You can only have a remote repository to an Artifactory. So you can only have an on-demand or proxy repositories from your Artifactories into an edge node. So you can do that, and you can do distribution. Okay? And of course, this edge node has the capabilities of a full-blown Artifactory, meaning enterprise-ready, HA, all the features of plugins, etc., that you can do, all the repository types. And the important part is, again, the read-onliness. You know, even as an admin, you cannot just go and delete something that belongs to a release bundle. And that means that when you will go to distribution and see that, oh, a release bundle was successfully distributed to a specific edge node, you are guaranteed. You have the trust that, you know, it's there. Everything is there. No one can manipulate that. It has arrived as one piece. It wasn't manipulated over untrusted networks, because there's a whole mechanism of signing and gaining, you know, the trust of the release bundle. And then you know, you have your runtime environment repository that you can trust. Okay, so let's talk about distribution flow and distribution focus. So when we've designed the release bundle and the distribution, we had a big focus on credibility. Okay, so when you will create a release bundle, you will sign this release bundle with a GPG key, and everything, all the contents will be validated when they arrive to the edge node. And the release bundle, once signed, becomes immutable. You cannot add more artifacts, change the artifacts that belong to a release bundle. So you are guaranteed that if you sign the release bundle and then 1 year later you have distributed that specific release bundle and it ended successfully, then everything that you have originally added to that release bundle will be on the edge node. Okay? And of course, you know, permissions, security, entities, access federation that I've talked about works very well with edge nodes and release bundle. You have the traceability, you know, compare that this distribution to something like customers use, like, I don't know, rsync, that you have no visibility or traceability into. Here you have, what was distributed, if it was successful or not. And then we have also a huge focus on the actual transport. So we try to minimize the bandwidth, so we don't, of course, distribute something that's already on the other side. We do a checksum-based distribution. It is also sometimes provide you with smart capabilities. Like, for example, you want to distribute a very large jar file, your Java application. So we found out that most of the times, the difference between two versions of a jar file is just a couple of class files inside. So what we'll do, we will query what's on the other side, which version of the jar file is on the other side, on the edge node, and then we'll do a diff, which files are different between that version and the one we're trying to distribute, and then transfer only the delta and rebuild the jar on the target side. Very smart replication and distribution. So how does it work? So let's actually see that in action. So again, do a screen share and share you. Where was that? Mission control and going into distribution. One second. Here it is. Okay. So in distribution, you can see I have here the release bundles management. So I can add a release bundle. I can see which release bundles are already available, that were distributed or not. So when you create a release bundle has, each release bundle has a unique name and version. So providing name and version. And then the source Artifactory. Why do we need to provide the source Artifactory? Because again, keep in mind, a release bundle, once signed, becomes immutable. So when we enumerate the artifacts that should be placed in this specific release bundle, we will do that by providing queries, Artifactory query language, AQL queries. And these queries will be executed against a specific Artifactory, and the release bundle will be tied to a specific source Artifactory. Okay, so we need to provide the specific source Artifactory, and then you can add one or more queries. So here I will just show you as an example, what is already here. So like this Docker app chart, you can see we have multiple versions for the release bundle. You can see the contents of a release bundle. So if I will, let's change this release bundle. Let's add more artifacts or whatnot. And you see, I cannot, because this release bundle was already signed, becomes immutable. I can, of course, clone this, get a copy, and then you can see here the queries. If you are familiar with AQL, Artifactory Query Language, so a release bundle is based on a group of AQLs that is being executed. AQLs are extremely powerful. If you are not familiar with them, this is a core feature of Artifactory. You should be familiar, because then it's a very good way to leverage the metadata capabilities in Artifactory. So you can select, I don't know, everything that has the property QA approved and I don't know, security approved and belong to specific repositories, I don't know, production repositories, and give me the latest versions that were released. You can create these types of queries and then, create the release bundles based on that. And I can create the release bundle and keep editing it, or create and sign it, in which case I will be able to distribute it. Okay? So yeah, if I will try to just distribute one of these. So let's actually see distribution tracking. So this specific bundle was distributed to an edge node in China. So let's try to distribute this again to the same edge node in China and to the edge node in Europe. Let's see. So distributing. Completed. Okay. Actually, this was probably, yeah, it's the chart and the Docker. It was maybe probably there, you know, so it ended very fast. If not, you will see like, oh, still distributing to Europe, but for China, it's completed immediately because everything was already there. So we do a checksum comparison and distribute accordingly. And also keep in mind that you can add in edge node smart repositories, proxies, and do on-demand consumption of binaries from your production level repositories. And of course, you can still manage permissions, and who can publish to which nodes, and who can create and manipulate release bundles. And the only way actually to delete something that belongs to a release bundle from an edge node is to go to that specific release bundle and delete it. So if I will try to delete a version, you can see I can also delete that from the destinations, from specific destinations, and maintain my retention policy accordingly. And of course, every feature I'm showing through the UI is also very important. Every feature I'm showing through the UI is also available through REST API, and most of them through also our CLI tools. So showing you, let me show you that. So I can go to my Jenkins job. So this is a Jenkins job focusing on distributing actually one of the release bundles you have seen. So I'm creating, you see a JSON with the AQL queries, source Artifactory, and then just using REST API to create and sign this release bundle. And then again, I'm not focusing on the entire script, but I just want to show you the capabilities. And then when I want to distribute, you can see that here it is. I can specify distribution rules. So it's not only distribute to specific locations, I can do wildcards. So I want to distribute to all the services in mission control that their name begins with Edge. But you can leverage that and name, some sites as canary deployment sites. So you can I want now to publish to 50 locations that are my canary deployment locations, and then later on do the same distribution for the actual production runtime locations. So this is solving the problem of the physics about distribution. Okay, I've covered the workflows and based on AQL queries. Okay, so takeaways from distribution. Again, the trust, the credibility of something that we actually distribute. Okay, we have enforcement of permissions, traceability, and very structured protocol and workflow with a release bundle, the create, the sign, the distribute. And we have very strong features for smart replication, even partial replication, like, difference inside jar files, etc. So yeah, we did a demo. So we've seen so far how to solve the problems that we have mentioned about the, insight into our builds, scaling with scaling complexity, trusting the software, and how to distribute the binaries. What I last want to talk about is the new addition. Okay, we recently acquired a company called Shippable, which had a CI/CD tool, and we have made some changes, and we are going to release it to GA very soon. It's already available for technical preview that you can download. Bringing a CI/CD tool as part of the platform will greatly enhance our ability to gain understanding and provide better analysis about what is happening in the entire pipeline, as well as provide, features that we think are missing from the other CI/CD tools. And again, I'm not going to cover here. It's not, again, a JFrog pipeline webinar. It, again, requires a webinar by itself. I want to focus about, what it will bring to the table regarding the problems that we've talked about. So yeah, it will bring you much more insight into what's happening. So just, I will get back to this slide. I think this should be near the end. So I will get back to that. So just highlighting the features of pipelines, okay? Provide a full CI/CD solution. It integrates well with every component that we have, from Artifactory to Xray into distribution, okay? It is declarative, so we use declarative language and not scripting. Very concise, very powerful. Again, imperative coding, Jenkins scripts, for example, are very hard to debug, leads to a lot of mistakes, and very hard to maintain. Cost of ownership is very high. And a pipeline example is just, you provide the resources, what pipelines communicate and consume, and then the steps of the pipelines, and it has great scalability. But then it also will be able to provide you a lot of metrics about what is happening and going on in your pipeline. So going back to that slide that I've skipped over. So if you want to try it, if already a customer, you can contact your account manager, get a trial license. You can download the trial license yourself, okay? And I will be happy to answer some questions now. So let's see if we have some. Yeah, we have some questions here. Using pipelines, can I still integrate with my existing CI tools? Okay, this is very important. So this is a question I hear a lot. Hey, I'm using Jenkins, I'm using GitLab CI, I'm using TeamCity, and I'm happy. I don't want JFrog pipelines. Or I want JFrog pipelines just for new additions, new projects. So yes, JFrog pipelines will integrate fully with what you have already built and used. We have, this is something we believe in JFrog. We don't try to force you to use anything. You want to use a different tool, we'll work with that. We don't try to force you to use our set of tools. We don't say that, oh, you're using Enterprise Plus or you're using Artifactory, you must use JFrog pipelines. No, we tell you what we think are the advantages. We will say if there are disadvantages, and then we'll say now you are free to choose. And if you already have, invested in like Jenkins, sure, there are Jenkins steps in JFrog pipelines that you can use and leverage. So yeah, the answer is yes. What is the advantage of having Xray integrated with my CI/CD pipelines? So the advantage is that first and foremost, you can fail builds. You can see that you have provided some policies to fail the builds when there are high severity vulnerabilities on specific builds, and then, yeah, those builds will fail, and you'll get the immediate feedback. You can trigger webhooks, and, Xray will send the JSON snippets about the vulnerabilities to your REST endpoints, and you can have that as part of the pipeline, and have an automation around that, sending Slack messages, creating Jira tickets, etc. Some common use cases for customers using an edge node versus a full Artifactory in E+ license. So again, the difference between an edge node and an Artifactory, putting aside the price, edge node is, again, I will not go into pricing, but edge node is cheaper than a full-blown Artifactory, but edge node is read-only. So this is an advantage, not a disadvantage, because on your production side, you want to be sure that no one, even as an administrator, someone with an admin permissions, will not be able to just go and delete a binary there. Okay, you want to control everything from a centralized location from your distribution service. If I have global development team, how will Access Federation help me manage my developers' access to Artifactory? Yeah, so if you have a global development team and your team is split across multiple locations, and you have Artifactories in these locations. So, one simple scenario is, yeah, I have my Artifactories in a single location. I have multiple teams spread across the globe, but I have a single location for Artifactory. So yeah, you don't need anything. You just maybe suffering from, high latencies. And then you want to add Artifactories to these locations, and you add replication for the relevant repositories. Then with Access Federation, you will get, as I've said before, you will get a federation for your security entities, the permissions, probably the most important component. The permissions that you are managing on one site will be replicated to the other sites. Okay, several others. If my organization is using Ant as a build tool, which does not have a dependency manager, can release bundle generate bill of materials in such case? Yes. So if you're using Ant as a build tool and you publish your artifacts into probably one of the Java repository types, then in the release bundle, you can just create a query that grabs artifacts from these repositories. A release bundle is not necessarily based on builds. It can be based on artifacts, on specific binaries. Those binaries can be gathered by using build information, using metadata, or using specific names. So yes, you can use release bundles and mark all your Ant binaries that reside in Artifactory. Can an organization create a release Maven repositories on an edge node and run Maven deploy goal to directly publish artifacts to an edge nodes? No, you cannot publish artifacts directly to an edge node. If you want to publish artifacts to your production site directly, you will need to use a regular Artifactory. So what we believe is, again, I'm not familiar with specifically your scenario, but maybe you publish to your development site, you promote it until a production level repository, and then you distribute that to an edge node. If you want to publish directly, you will need to use a regular Artifactory. Is it possible to create an additional approval workflow using Xray? Yes. So approval workflow, usually what we recommend is have something to mark, the binaries that are affected, that have vulnerabilities, or you can just trigger a webhook from Xray that, will send a JSON snippet. You will have a REST API that will just add some metadata to these vulnerable artifacts in Artifactory. And based on this metadata, what you can have is an approval workflow. You can look at our Artifactory user plugin repository. There are some security plugins there that support an approval workflow examples. So yes, definitely we have customers having manual approval workflows with Xray. If I have a remote repository configured to mirror an extra repo, does Xray scan after monitoring the binary in cache repository? You can impose rule action to restrict the download of a dependency. So this is important. Xray scans only something in Artifactory. So we don't scan before it enters one of the repositories. So if you're using like a third party that is being downloaded from an external registry, it is being downloaded to a cache repository in Artifactory, and that cache repository will be scanned by Xray. And if you mark it that policy as not being able to be downloaded, then if security vulnerabilities were found, you will not be able to use that dependency. Okay, so yeah, effectively, that dependency will not be usable at all if you specified that in the policy and it contains a security vulnerability. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and thanks for joining. Bye-bye.